What has Athens to do with Jerusalem? Said one thinker in the 2nd century. That was Tertullian, who was a Christian apologist who really didn't like the idea of religion and philosophy being bedfellows. Well, I'm going to introduce you to a thinker today who is very happy with philosophy and religion being good bedfellows, and that is David Bentley Hart. I'm going to just introduce today one of his books, and in following videos I'm going to be going into greater depth. So David Bentley Hart, if you don't know him, is a philosopher of religion, American, but his particular interests are in consciousness, particularly philosophy of mind. He's also interested in metaphysics more broadly, and does work in theology, and has caused some positive controversy in places where he's challenged, kind of nasty ideas in some quarters of Christianity, like, the idea that everybody would, not everybody, but some people would spend forever in hell, things like that. And he tackles that question beautifully, philosophically, but also attacking it from the very text of Christianity itself, trying to undermine that idea. So if you've not met David Bentley Hart before, you're not familiar with him, I would really encourage you to check him out. He's an interesting guy all around, a huge intellect. Any book I read of his, I probably end up looking up 2 to 3 words every page, if not more sometimes. Anyway, so let's get into this book. His basic title is You Are Gods on Nature and Supernature, and that betrays a little bit of his interest. He's also, I don't know if I mentioned a second ago, into something called Advaita Vedanta. So he believes that all of reality is ultimately one, which is the Hindu belief of non-duality. But he's kind of arguing in this book, nature and supernature, this idea that divine and human, etc., or divine and the natural world is separate, is false. He's saying, actually, no, it's not. And he starts off in this book with a quote that fits beautifully in Hindu Advaita Vedanta philosophy, but guess where it comes from? Well, I'll let you work it out. I'm going to read it and see if you can work out who it was said by, and where the source is. Is it not written in your law, I said, you are gods? If he called those to whom God's logos came gods, and if scripture cannot be dissolved, do you then tell him whom the Father sanctified and sent out into the cosmos, you blaspheme? Just because I have said I am the Son of God. Well, if you've not guessed already, this is a quote from Jesus, as John has him say that in John's Gospel. John, for those interested, John chapter 10, verses 34 to 36. So Hart places this right at the beginning of his book, because it fits beautifully in that whole thing that he's trying to say, is that there's really no real division between humanity and the divine, and no real division between nature and supernature. So he gives 5 kind of premises at the beginning of the book in the introduction, so that's nicely laid out for us, and I'm just going to introduce those to you today, and then we'll go into more depth as we go into the videos to come. So the first premise, the first kind of argument he's trying to make, is that all spiritual creatures are headed ultimately within creation, within the cosmos, to a final liberation. He says this: the sole sufficient natural end of all spiritual creatures is the supernatural, and grace is nothing but the necessary liberation of all creatures for their natural ends. Now, he's really probably tackling some theological arguments there, and he's trying to say, he's kind of arguing his universalism, which is basically the idea that ultimately, God has to save or liberate all of creation, not just part of it, if God is actually good. So he's not really arguing with skeptics as such, though he's trying to deal with Christian theists that like, for example, hell or that kind of thing. So that is the first thing, and notice that he's really trying to break that division between the natural and the supernatural, and is really saying that nature finds its home within the supernatural, humanity finds its home within the divine, if you like. he uses a technical term, grace, there. So let me read that again. The sole sufficient natural end of all spiritual creatures is the supernatural, and grace is nothing but the necessary liberation of all creatures for their natural ends. Grace there just simply means divine action. So he's saying, well, divine action is just there, and it's ongoing, and it will achieve its ends within the creation and within the cosmos. Now, that's something that you won't necessarily believe if you're not not religious, or you're not particularly a Christian, but it's just worth bearing in mind his framing of that, his version of Christianity there, that I think is a positive version. Part two, argument two, is basically that nature is not separate or self-sufficient. So here maybe he's having a little bit of a dig maybe at the naturalists, people that say that nature is just all there is, and it's self-sufficient. But he's also, in the book, going to be taking a bit of a dig at the way some theists, believers in God, separate nature and the supernatural out to such an extent, like almost like nature's like the cake and supernature is like the icing on top of the cake. And he says, well, they implicitly, in doing this, kind of almost treat nature a bit like the naturalist might do, as if it wouldn't make much difference whether there was icing there or not, that nature is kind of self-sufficient. And he says, no, that doesn't work. Nature is, in his way of thinking, always an outworking of the ultimately divine. Okay, so let me quote the quote for that point too. He says, in his own words, nature stands in relation to supernature as, in Aristotelian terms, prime matter to form. Nature in itself has no real existence and can have none. It is entirely an ontological patency before the formal causality of supernature, and only as grace can nature possess any actuality at all. Again, by grace there he means divine action, that nature is a product, an outflowing of the divine. Notice again, breaking down that barrier between nature and the divine, or nature and supernature. Third premise of the book is basically that there can be no final failure in creation if God is actually good. In his own words, he says, no spiritual creature could fail to achieve its naturally supernatural end unless God himself were the direct moral cause of evil in that creature, which is impossible. Conversely, God saves creatures by removing extrinsic, physical, that is non-moral, impediments to their natural union with him. Because let's say if we took the idea of Christianity or other religions as well, that have people kind of eventually arriving at their kind of the end goal of creatures, ultimate union with God, let's say. If you just don't have the intellect or the inclination because of, some aspect of your DNA or your makeup or your upbringing, etc., that's hardly fair. So what he's really saying is, look, all of that will be overcome, that God cannot fail in his ultimate purposes. So wherever we're coming from as our starting point, all of spiritual creatures are headed ultimately to the same destiny, towards God, towards the good, the one. Point 4, he's going to argue, premise 4 is around the Christian idea of the incarnation, which is the idea of the divine coming and taking human form, inhabiting humanity. And he basically argues that divinity already contains the human before the incarnation, be it of Christ or any other kind of God figure you might believe in. And he says, no, basically for the divine and the human to be able to interact, there has to be a commonality and a connection between them already. And for there to be any incarnation of the divine, really, it's like, for there to be any incarnation of the divine, there would have to be some kind of, I'm going to use the word natural in a very loose sense, some natural fit between the divine and the human for the divine to become human without creating some bizarre chimera or monster type being that has attributes that are divine and attributes that are human that don't fit together. Okay, so he's saying no, because the human is already contained within the divine, for the divine to incarnate and become human is not something that is like water and oil. You know, it's a natural, air quote, thing to do. It's not incoherent, if you like. Okay. His actual words, from premise 4, are God became human so that humans should become God. Only the God who is always already human can become human. Only a humanity that is always already divine can become God. In other words, again, he's breaking down this barrier between creature and creator. And then argument 4, premise 4, is that really, and this is Advaita Vedanta thinking coming out again here, but also matches, we might argue, with that quote from John's Gospel I gave earlier. But God is all there is. We don't have to have this divine creaturely division. Bentley Hart says this: God is all that is. Whatever is not God exists as becoming divine, and as such is God in the mode of what is other than God, but God is not the other of anything. On that tantalizing point, I will leave you to follow other videos, and please do follow and put comments. I'd love to hear what you think as we go along. Put a like, do share generously with other people as well, so that more people get to see this stuff. Thanks for following along. See you soon.